What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 5 players to buy low on. This is my favorite part of fantasy, but you guys apparently like start-sit questions more than 2 trade videos. So just like last week, I'll be answering your start-sit questions on Friday, and this will be the only trade video on the week. So leave your questions in the comment section of today's video, of tomorrow's video, and I'll try and go over a good sample of those. So let's see who the trade model likes this week. The top options have been great over the last few weeks and wanted you to trade for Lindsay 2 weeks ago, then Sutton and Fournette last week. And the logic is fairly simple. Identify players getting good and consistent volume, but who've gotten unlucky in the touchdown department. I was reading through a few comments and it seems like some people don't like this strategy, mainly because they say players on bad teams won't score as often. And that's partly true. If your team's only scoring 15 to 17 points a week, then the touchdown ceiling on those players is definitely capped. But I think it's more important to understand what the model's looking for. It's not telling you to trade for Adam Humphries or Hunter Renfrow because they haven't scored yet. It recognizes when people don't score, but there's more that goes into it than that. In week 2, Hunter Renfrow had 4 receptions for 30 yards on 8 targets and 51 air yards with a 6.4 ADOT. Now he probably underperformed and maybe he makes the bottom of the list with that sort of production. But it's tough to say that he got unlucky with touchdowns there. Even with the 8 targets, they weren't that great of targets, so there wasn't that much upside for touchdowns. Courtland Sutton in that same week had 4 receptions for 40 yards on 7 targets. But he did so on 82 air yards and an 11.7 ADOT. So both players didn't score and posted mediocre stat lines, but where their targets were on the field was entirely different. So a player like Sutton is more likely to score on his targets than Renfrow is, and the model understands that. So I hope that makes sense, and I'll try and walk through my exact reasoning on each player so that you can fully understand why I'm saying trade for these guys. But we'll start things off at wide receiver this week with Allen Robinson. So he checks in third for the buy low model this week, and he's really been a staple over the first month of the season because he still hasn't scored a touchdown despite 34 targets for 338 air yards through 4 weeks. That makes up a 25% target share and a 36% share of the team's total air yards. There are 5 wide receivers with targets on the Bears. Robinson is the only one over 150 air yards with 338, and he's the only one over 15 targets, again, with 34. He's by far the top option in the passing game, and I have to think the offense will get better at some point this season. They've looked pathetic. I mean, just really, really bad. You have to think at some point they're going to turn it around, and when they do, it's going to be really, really good for Robinson. Trubisky did dislocate his shoulder and a slight labrum tear. We don't know exactly how much slight is, but the reports seem to indicate that he could be back in week 7, so not that much of an absence. And realistically, it's not like Chase Daniels is that much of a downgrade. So if you need a little bit more wide receiver depth, then I can bet you Robinson is gonna be cheap and he's gonna score soon. So trade for him before he does. Another wide receiver that I'm sure you're sick of me talking about is Curtis Samuel, but he has just dominated the air yards in Carolina, and he's going to explode soon. This past week, he had just 3 receptions for 32 yards despite 7 targets and 151 air yards. And those air yards ranked 3rd among all wide receivers in week 4 and represented 54% of the team's total. That bumps his unrealized air yards, which is just air yards minus receiving yards, to 2nd among all wide receivers on the season. He has a 21% share of the Panthers' targets and a 37% share of their air yards. Yet he has an average stat line of just 4 for 52 and just 1 total touchdown. Just like Allen Robinson, Curtis Samuel is going to go off soon. And speaking of unrealized air yards, how about Will Fuller? Fuller currently has the 4th most unrealized air yards among all wide receivers this season, getting 100 air yards per game, yet only turning that into 3.5 receptions for 46 yards a game with no touchdowns on the season. This is another player that's going to explode soon, yet you can get him for basically free, and I even got him on free agency in one league. Fuller was tackled at the 2-yard line 2 weeks ago and just missed a 75-yard touchdown this past week. He's playing virtually every snap, and if you look at his route tree on NFL Next Gen Stats, then you can see he's still being used deep down the field in those high upside targets. And he's honestly had a few tough matchups to start the season, including a Panthers team last week that sells out to limit deep passes. This is still the Will Fuller that dominated when healthy, and it's only a matter of time before he goes for 150 and multiple scores, which could very well happen this week when they take on the Falcons at home. The last wide receiver we'll talk about today is Marquise Brown, and after getting off to a really hot start on just 14 snaps in week 1, he's hit a little bit of a slump. Over the past 3 weeks, he's averaged just 4.6 receptions for 52 yards, and he hasn't scored. But oh my goodness, look at his volume. The second most used wide receiver on Baltimore has 8 targets over that stretch. Marquise Brown has 39. Then Boykin ranks second in air yards with 91. Well, Brown has 413. He's getting 10 targets a week with a 14.2 ADOT, but his price has dropped significantly over the last 2 weeks because he just hasn't hit on a few of these deep shots and he hasn't gotten into the end zone. But his volume is extremely elite, so you need to trade for him before he goes off again. Let's move on to running back, where identifying buy low candidates is a little bit more difficult. One, because the position is slightly less volatile. You're typically going to see pretty similar volume every single week as a running back. And 2, people know who the elite running backs are, so they're not just willing to give them up. But I've got 3 names here that have been underperforming or are a little bit cheaper than they should be. And the first one is Le'Veon Bell. Not necessarily saying he's underperforming, although he is averaging just 2.9 yards per carry and only has 1 touchdown through 3 weeks. But I think the value on him is lower than it should be. He's seeing 100% of the snaps, and his one bad game came against the Patriots, and you can't really blame someone for playing bad against that defense. He's seeing as much receiving game work as any running back in the league, and he's played 2 games with Luke Falk. Plus, he's already had his bye, so he should be valued as probably a top 6 running back moving forward. And while you'll still need to give up a lot to get him, if you have a really deep bench, you've got awesome wide receivers, maybe you picked up Darren Waller when you already drafted an elite tight end, and you've got pieces to where the Le'Veon Bell owner maybe needs another stud wide receiver, needs a tight end, and you can package those 2 to get a running back, and you need an upgraded running back, this is the guy that I would go after, especially if the Bell owner has struggled to start the season and either doesn't have a win, has 1 win, maybe 2 wins. You can probably get him for cheaper than you should be able to. The next player you'll definitely be able to get cheap is Joe Mixon, and his value is just extremely low right now, especially after everyone watched the Bengals get crushed on Monday Night Football. But Mixon is the team's clear lead back when he's healthy. Yes, Bernard takes away some work, but Mixon is by far the most used player when they get close to the goal line, and he's involved in the receiving game, and they're going to win at some point. They're 0-4, but they're going to win a few games this season. They're not going to be this bad all year, especially when AJ Green returns. I do expect this offense to step it up, but right now the receivers just aren't getting that open, and it's tough for a running back when the offense just stalls every single drive and isn't scoring very many points. But I expect them to be better moving forward, and he's not going to finish the season as the running back 34 that he is right now. So trade for him before that offense figures things out. The last running back is someone I talked about last week, but Royce Freeman. And I know this one isn't as exciting as Bell or Mixon, but he's a low-end running back 3 right now, and that's only because he's scored 0 touchdowns. They're using him in the exact same role as Lindsey, and he actually outsnapped Lindsey 34-25 last week. Freeman has 19 targets on the year, which ties Lindsey and Chubb for 13th among running backs, and he's doing really well on the ground, in large part thanks to seeing the 5th lowest rate of 8+ defenders in the box. Again, I know this is not an exciting name, but he's getting consistent volume, and he's more involved in the passing game than people think. He just hasn't scored yet. but it's coming. At tight end, it's sort of tough to buy low on players. No one wants to give up a tight end when they're involved in the offense because there really aren't that many that are involved in the offense, and free agency is really gross. So you should probably be targeting a team that either only has 0 or 1 wins on the season, or a team that has multiple good tight ends, and they're not just going to have to go find one on free agency because they have a backup. The only 2 players I can really recommend trading for are the same 2 that I mentioned last week. Zach Ertz leads all tight ends in targets, but he has the 5th most unrealized air yards among tight ends, and he hasn't scored yet, so he's just the tight end 8. And then Kittle, who's the tight end 18 on the year, and the 49ers are asking him to block a lot, so his upside isn't the same as last year, but he's obviously a top 7 or 8 tight end, and he just had his bye, so you don't need to worry about that, but he's still George Kittle, so he's gonna be better than he's been so far. The thing with them is, I'd still be surprised if their owners didn't ask a lot in these trades. So know that, yeah, these guys are definitely underperforming, but everyone knows Ertz and Kittle, so it's not like you're going to get them for free. But again, those are really the only 2 names I can come up with because no stud tight ends are just underperforming drastically that I really want to be trading for. At quarterback, we have no one. Remember, we don't trade for quarterbacks. If we're involved in a quarterback trade, it means that we're the one trading away a quarterback to upgrade at a position that matters more because there's always quarterbacks on free agency. So, those are the top trade targets for week 5. Remember, I can't go over every name in the buy low model, so if you want to see the complete list, then you can do so at our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. Also remember that I'm answering flex questions on Friday, so make sure to write your questions in the comment section of either today or tomorrow's video, and I'll be sure to answer as many of them as I can. But that, my friends, is the end of this one. I hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And if you're new here, how about subscribing to the channel? But thanks for watching.